demonstrate how to make a quiche or egg and bacon flan. Lots of people call them, or a cheese flan. You can put any flavour in you want, so don't be put off if you don't like the sound of quiche. Today the ingredients you'll need are 200 grams of plain flour and half that quantity of butter or margarine, so that's 100 grams of butter, and I'm just using spreadable butter in there. Now this will fill a tin about 8 inches, okay, with a side up. So that's the quantity for that. If you've got a bigger dish, you'll need more flour and more butter. But as long as you stick to the ratio, 2 lots of flour to 1 lot of fat, be it margarine or butter, it'll work. You also need, for this quantity, I'm going to put half a pint of milk, and you can put cream in there if you want to make it creamier, but that's just half a pint of milk, and 2 eggs. And again, the ratio to make it set is 1 egg to 1/4 pint of milk. So if you've got a bigger dish, put a pint in, 4 eggs. 3/4 of a pint, 3 eggs. So it's quite easy to work out. 1/4 of a pint, 1 egg. I'm putting in mine, and I've just fried this off. I've got a mixture of bacon, onion, and there's a leek thrown in there, and a little bit of parsley. But you don't have to put any of that in. You could just do cheese, or you can just do cheese and onion, or you can put ham in. And really, you could make up your own design of quiche. The egg and the milk holds everything together. Then I've got about 200 grams of cheese, because I like my quiche quite cheesy. So I've got grated cheese there to put in, and that's about it, and seasoning, and that's it. Put my fat into my flour, and you should know by now what method this is. This is the rubbing in method. So I'm just, again, cutting up my fat so that it's coated with the flour, and then I'm going to put the fingertips in, and it's time to rub in again. And this is a very popular method for making lots of food, and it's easy as long as you stick to the basics of just keeping your fingertips in as the cooler and moving the fat around, digging down to the bottom so that your fingers are coated in flour all the time, and that just stops it getting all mushy and melting the fat. And you can see, just rubbing my fingers together. If you've got an electric mixer, you could use an electric mixer for this bit really, but you've just got to be careful, or a food processor, but you've just got to be careful you don't overdo it. It's a bit more controlled when you're using your hands. And again, if you use that ratio, like I said at the beginning, for pastry, for double the flour to the fat, so 2-to-1 ratio, usually that's your basic short crust pastry. That's the breadcrumb stage done. You can see no big lumps in there. Give it a shake if you want, and then it's time to add the water. So this is always a tricky bit for most people. You could put an egg in there as liquid, and that makes a bit of a richer pastry. This is a basic pastry you could use for any pie, sausage rolls, bakewell tarts, anything that requires a short crust pastry. And if you want to make it sweet, you just put a spoonful of sugar in it. Castor or icing sugar is probably best because it's less gritty, but it's all fine, either whatever sugar you've got. Even if you use granulated, it'll make a bit of a crunchier pastry, but it'll be fine. So you can see I've added 4 spoonfuls, I think then, lost count. And I'm just stirring this around. You can see it's starting to clump together, but it's not quite there yet, so I'm going to add another 2, and these are dessert spoonfuls, which I still haven't found my tablespoons. And I'm going to give that a good stir, and you can see the difference now. It's really stuck together, and it's now a dough ball. Now pastry does not like being handled, so I'm going to handle this as little as possible. Okay, so into the dough, a little bit of flour just to stop it from sticking. If you've added a bit too much water, then you might need a little bit of flour, but try not to add too much because you're spoiling the ratio of flour to fat if you're putting loads of flour on it, and it does dry out your pastry, and it does start tasting a bit like cardboard if you're not careful. So you can give it a bit of a knead just to make sure it sticks together. And this is very similar to the cheesy scone whirls that I did, but there's more fat in it, so it's going to be shorter, which means it's going to be more crumbly. So just be careful, don't overhandle it. Okay, so rolling pin. You could use, if you haven't got a rolling pin, you can squash it with your hands. Jamie Oliver does one where he does little balls of dough and he just almost plays like dot to dot and squashes it into a flan tin. Sorry. You could use a bottle as long as it's clean. And you're just rolling it. Try not to overstretch the pastry. Okay, it's not Play-Doh. And keep moving it around. Look what I'm doing. I'm picking it up so that I haven't rolled it out beautifully and then it's all stuck to the unit or stuck to the worktop. And I've not, you might have noticed, turned it over either. I'm just rolling one side of it. Okay? When your pastry's rolled out, check it's big enough by you can either put your tin on it, just be careful it's not dirty on the bottom. But remember, you've got to come up the sides. Okay? And that looks just about right. So what I'm going to do is now lift it into my tin. Now this is a loose bottom tin. If you haven't got one of these, you can use a ceramic or a glass dish or a lid off one of the Pyrex dishes or a baking tin. These kind of dishes are absolutely fine as well. I like the metal tin, but it's really personal choice on what you've got around the house. So how am I going to get that into there? I'm going to use my rolling pin. So I'm going to lift my pastry carefully onto there and just gently pick it up. And yeah, I have been quite, I'm not heavy-handed with the pastry at all. I've been quite light, trying to be as light as I can with it. And then I'm going to aim and fire and fail miserably. I've missed it, but you'll be better than that, I'm sure. And just lift it up. Remember, pastry does not like being pulled and stretched, because if you stretch it, it'll just shrink back. So lift it and push it and be gentle with it. Okay, now when it's in the tin like that, you want to try and get the pastry into the corners. So if you use the end of your finger like that, not your fingertip, which will make a hole in it, you can lift the pastry up and just gently push it in, okay? And the aim is not to have any holes in this pastry case. And with this particular recipe, it's really, really important because you're going to put a liquid in it. If you're going to put a solid in, like a cake or jam, it wouldn't matter if there's the odd hole in it. But because it's a liquid, you need to make sure there's no holes in the pastry case at all. So if you do get a hole, you've got to seal it up. So you could pull a little bit of pastry off, and you could use water as glue, and you can stick it over like a plaster really onto the hole to stop it from leaking. Okay, so I've kind of done that okay now. A couple of things you can do: you can chill your pastry now because it likes cold conditions, and it'll just relax and fit your baking tin a little bit more. So if you've got the time, you can put that in the fridge as it is. If you want it for lunch like me and you're in a bit of a hurry, you can follow my next instructions. I quite like doing this bit because it's a metal tin. If I roll the rolling pin over, it cuts it for me. It's good. I need to get out more, don't I? So you roll it across like that and it cuts the pastry off. Now if you haven't got a metal tin, it's a little bit more difficult. I would use a sharp knife or one with a relatively good blade on it and just go around and cut it like that. Okay, so if this is a fluted tin, it goes in and out. So it's a little bit difficult to do that with a knife. But if you've got a straight edge tin, you can just use a knife. It's up to you if you decorate around the edge. I quite like the look of that because mine's going to come out of the tin when I've cooked it. So that's ready now to do one of two things. You can either bake it blind, which for those in my GCSE classes, we know that means baking without a filling in first and then baking it again with the filling in. And for that, you need baking beads. You'd also use this technique if you wanted to do a sweet flan and you wanted to put a cold filling in. So say you wanted to do a sweet pastry and then put fruit in, like strawberries or cream or custard, you'd cook it first, leave it to cool, and then put your filling in. Baking it blind saves you having a soggy bottom. We've heard that on British Bake Off, and that's what Paul Hollywood's talking about. If you cook it first, it kind of helps cook the pastry in this bit here. If you're not bothered about a soggy bottom, it still tastes nice. You can just cook it now with the filling in. I'm going to show you how to bake it blind though. So I've got a piece of paper. I keep this specially for my baking blind. If you haven't got baking parchment, you can use tin foil. I put that in because I'm going to put the baking beans in. Now these you can get from supermarkets much cheaper than they used to be. They're about £3.50, something like that, from Home Bargain. And you can just pour that in, and they are ceramic little balls. We call them baking beans. If you haven't got these, you could use rice or something, or just old pieces of pastry. And the main aim of this is to weight down the bottom of the flan so it doesn't rise up during cooking. Now these are good as well because they heat up really quite hot in the oven, so they cook the pastry from the top as well as the oven cooking the pastry from underneath. So that goes in the oven with those baking beans in for about 15 minutes, and then I'll take the baking beans out and put it back in for 5 minutes just to finish off cooking the middle. Now you notice I put it on one of my old baking trays. It's easier to handle, okay, and especially when we're going to put a wet filling in and a runny liquid filling, it's much easier to handle this to put it in and out of the oven. Okay, just be careful because it will be hot, so make sure you use oven gloves or get someone to help you do it. So that's going in the oven for about 15 minutes, and pastry likes hot temperatures, so about 200 degrees or gas mark 6. So 15 minutes, and then we'll talk about filling. It's now been in for 15 minutes with the baking beans in, so it's a little bit tricky. You've got to really make sure you don't puncture the pastry and make a hole in it like I'm doing. It's the paper that gets stuck in the pastry. So you can lift the baking beans out and they can go back in the jar when they cool down. You can see from the base that's just a little bit undercooked because it's a little bit wet looking. So that's going to go back in the oven for about 5 minutes just to dry out, and then I'm going to put my filling in. If you want to miss this stage out altogether, the baking blind, you can do. I would just put the pastry to chill a little bit in the fridge while you do your filling. Just while we're on that subject, you can see, even though I was careful rolling my pastry out, it just shrunk a little bit. So if you over roll it, the pastry will shrink down and you won't have enough depth in your tart or your quiche or your flan. So just be aware of that. Okay? So the pastry's been in for about 20 minutes, being baking blind, and you can see when I've taken the baking beans out, you can see why you need them, because this has got a bit of air in it there and it's puffed up. So the baking beans weight it down. But as I say, if you haven't got baking beans and you don't want to bake it blind, you just skip all that bit and move on to filling. So I'm using bacon, onion, a bit of leek, there's parsley in there. I'm using a real variety of fillings. I like it quite varied, but you can just use cheese, and you don't actually even need to cook the onion and the bacon. You can just put it in straight because it will be in the oven for 20 minutes. But again, I like it quite soft and I like it quite sautéed off first. So filling in the bottom, I'm going to put the cheese on as well. You can do this after the wet if you want the liquid, but just makes it easy. You can spread it out. Okay, so spread that out, and that's your filling. So now all I need to do is to put a savoury, we call it a custard, but it's a savoury custard. You usually think of custard as sweet, but basically custard is just egg and milk. So in here I've got my half a pint of milk. I've put a little bit of cream in actually as well, just to make it a bit creamier, and I'm going to put 2 eggs in. So smash your egg Do it separately again if you're worried about getting shell in it or you're not very confident at doing it. Just hold it, give it a whack, just a firm whack that does it, and then pull it apart. And that way you get a clean break. Okay. Give it a bit of a whisk round, make sure those yolks are all broken up. Okay. And you can see how I've got a lot more liquid now in there. If you've got a bigger tin, as I said at the beginning, you'd need to increase your quantities. But this is now made like almost like a pint of liquid. Make sure those eggs are mixed in properly. Just make sure it's the yolks really. I'm going to season it, a little bit of pepper. I'm not going to put much salt in this because the bacon is quite salty that I've used, but a little tiny pinch. And also salt can be quite salty as well. Cheese, sorry, can be quite salty. Okay, give that a whisk. Eggs don't want to mix. And then I'm going to pour that carefully all over the filling. So this will hold everything together and make a really nice tasty filling. And I really don't like shop bought quiche, but I love homemade quiche. But you can put lots of different flavours in this, and you can just experiment until you find something you like. You can put things that you didn't think would go together. Even things like using up boiled potatoes go quite nicely in here. If you use spinach, you can put fish in, like tinned fish in. Just depends. Now I fill that to the top, and I've got a sneaking suspicion I've overfilled it, but it'll bake in the oven, and that's going to go in the oven for about 20 minutes until it's set. So you just can see that you've got to be very careful. In the oven, 20 minutes, and then it'll be all puffed up, and I'll show you how to see whether it's ready. Right, the quiche has been in the oven for about 20 minutes, and you can tell it's ready because if you give it a bit of a shake, it just wobbles gently, there's no liquid. Mine's cooled down a little bit now, that's why I can handle it. So the loose bottom tin, and I have a confession to make, I did say that I think I put too much liquid over it, and it's just stuck the pastry to the side of the tin, but I've loosened it with a knife, and one easy way of getting the bottom, the cake tin off the quiche is just to do that. And you can see it's not perfect because that's just where the egg and the milk has stuck the pastry to the tin. But it's not bad, I'm quite happy with that. Put it on a plate, decorate it, garnish with a little bit of parsley, something, and make a really nice lunch or tea. Serve it with chips, jacket potato, a bit of salad, lovely. See you next time.